Due to the high personal losses in the Russian campaign, from autumn 1941, the Wehrmacht deployed Soviet defectors as so-called auxiliary volunteers for the rear combat zone. The Wehrmacht thus won more German soldiers for combat operations. These willing prisoners of war were in German also called Hilfswillige or Hiwis for short. Around 60 Eastern battalions alone were deployed on the Atlantic Wall. However, the readiness for action was low. During the fighting in Normandy in June of 1944, in the area of Utah, Juneau, and Sword, these battalions often laid down their arms very quickly and surrendered to the Allies. Some battalions even mutinied and killed the German cadre personnel. In addition to these Hiwis, since January 22, 1943, male high school students between the ages of 15 and 17 were also used as Air Force assistants in Germany. Always complete school classes were drafted and stayed together. Those Air Force assistants are commonly known as anti-aircraft helpers, or in German, Flak Helfer. Initially, the use of girls was not intended. However, it could be done on a voluntarily basis from the age of 17. Later, there were service obligations, mainly in Air Force communications and with searchlight batteries. From 1944, female members of the Reich Labor Service, in German Reichsarbeitsdienst, also were used in flak batteries. In 1984, the former Luftwaffe helper Helmut Zirkelbach appeared, gave an interview, and recalls his time 40 years earlier when he was a 15-year-old Flak Helfer with an anti-aircraft battery of Flak Regiment 29 in Frankfurt am Main. I was a student at the Brothers Grimm School in Frankfurt am Main. After the first heavy air raids on our city, we came to Schloss Meerholz near Gelnhausen. Meerholz Castle was a Landschulheim, or a country school home, as it was called at the time. There, at the end of 1943, we received the draft order as an anti-aircraft helper. On January 4th, 1944, our service as a Flak Helfer began. That was over in Frankfurt-Fechenheim, Starkenburger Straße, in a position called the Main Loop. I was a boy of 15, not yet physically trained. That's why I wasn't able to transport the ammunition of an 8.8 anti-aircraft gun. I was ordered to do the anti-aircraft ballistic director. That was the part where the data recorded by measuring or optical devices from the enemy aircraft had been recorded and converted for the guns. In Fechenheim, we also had to survive the first bomb attack directly on our position. A schoolmate of mine lost a leg at that time. He had been hit by a phosphorus canister containing an explosive device. We were in this position until May or June of '44 and had a lot of missions in the bombing raids on Frankfurt and the surrounding area. The German air defense worked with a Reichsair defense map. Frankfurt had the grid square QS5, abbreviation for Quelle Siegfried 5. In the summer of 1944, Helmut Zirkelbach's battery was relocated to the Heiligenstock in the suburb of Bergersheim, north of Frankfurt. On the unwooded ridge between Bergersheim and Bad Vilbel, the guns had a clear field of fire to the northwest. That was the usual direction from which the stream of bombers flew in. The U.S. Army Air Forces during the day, the Royal Air Force at night. After around 40 years, I'm back at the exact place where, as an adventurous boy, how I would like to put it, I experienced my first baptism of fire as a soldier. Actually, we weren't really soldiers. We were anti-aircraft helpers and still wore the Hitler Youth badge on our uniforms. We only became soldiers at a late date. The American army was already approaching Frankfurt. At that time, it was feared that our status would not be recognized and that we would run the risk of being treated as partisans. I must confess today that when I was drafted from school to the Flak, it was initially something adventurous for me. It wasn't really to the cowboy and Indian games we played before, but it was something else. One had the feeling that one is more than just a schoolboy, that one is able and can serve the fatherland. Later, of course, everything changed in attitude and in retrospect. And when it came to the end here, when the Americans were getting closer and closer, there was more fear in our faces than the thirst for adventure that we had felt before. The time between the attacks was used intensively. Since most of the boys were still of compulsory schooling, they were not exempted from daily classes during the war. However, Zirkelbach errs in this memory. There were no classes in English or French. According to the regulations, the high school students had 18 hours of schooling per week, 3 hours each of German, Latin, history, mathematics, and 2 hours each of physics, chemistry, and geography. Latin was the only foreign language. And so we often sat with our teachers in our barracks and learned math, English and French. Then the alarm came. The teacher was allowed into the bunker. His students had to go to the guns and the fire control devices. That indeed was a strange situation. For us, the war came to an end very quickly. At the end of March 1945, the Americans had reached Frankfurt and our battery was instructed to shoot barrage fire over the Wilhelmsbrücke. With this we should block the only still intact bridge over the Main River against driving or walking by the US troops. We were also told that there was an artillery observation post in the cathedral, and that we would be very successful with our fire. But our shooting only lasted 24 hours. Then the Americans were on the other side of the Main and approached the north of Frankfurt. On March 27th, I believe, we received orders to destroy the position. The guns were blown up, all files and documents were burned. I myself destroyed optical devices, transmitters, and other things with a hammer and other objects. Then I got the order to drop off in the background to the small forest in the direction of Bad Vilbel. But I was not a war hero, and I was fed up. So I turned this order into another version. I threw everything I had, rifle, uniform, steel helmet, gas mask canister, and a couple of hand grenades into the river Nidda. Then I was a schoolboy again and fled to Bad Homburg. There a friend hid me in a shop. Then I was a salesman for a few days. When the Americans overran us, the war was finally over for me, and I was able to return to my parents' house in Frankfurt unmolested. Helmut Zirkelbach later became the CEO of the Waldstadion, the soccer stadium for the Bundesliga soccer team Eintracht Frankfurt. Today, the stadium is called Deutsche Bank Park.